What if, in a single instant, you discovered that your whole life had been built on a lie? Leonardo always believed he had control over everything: wealth, power, destiny. But a simple trip to a restaurant forgotten in time shatters that illusion. An unfamiliar waitress, a rejected plate of food, a photo, and then the devastating truth. He has a daughter, and she hates him. Now he has to face the consequences of a buried past and choices he never knew he had made. But will a man used to buying everything get something that money can't offer? Time, forgiveness, a second chance. The rain beat down on the sidewalk as Leonardo got out of the car, adjusting his coat to avoid the icy drips that ran from his hair to his collar. He looked around in disgust. The restaurant was small, with a faintly flashing sign, and the fogged windows barely allowed him to see inside. He let out an impatient sigh before pushing open the door, making the bell above tinkle. The smell of grease and stale coffee immediately hit him, turning his already upset stomach. He sat down at a table near the window, pushing away the wooden chair that creaked under his weight. He picked up the plastic menu with a disdainful expression and flipped through it without interest. The low prices and simple options reinforced what he already knew. This was not the kind of place he should be. "Good evening, sir. What can I get you?" He looked up to find a young woman with her arms crossed, holding an order form. Her gaze was neutral, but something in her posture indicated impatience. "Something that won't make me regret coming here," she replied dryly, closing the menu and throwing it on the table. She didn't flinch. "Our special dish is the most ordered. Would you like to try it?" He snorted. "Whatever, as long as it's quick." The waitress took his order and walked away without saying another word. Leonardo checked his watch. He was there at the insistence of a business partner who had suggested meeting there, but the other hadn't arrived yet. He would have preferred his usual restaurant, a place that matched his position. A few minutes later, the plate was placed in front of him, a steaming stew accompanied by homemade bread. Leonardo observed the presentation and pursed his lips. "Is this the special?" he asked, picking up his fork hesitantly. "Yes," replied the waitress, raising an eyebrow. He picked up a piece of meat and inspected it before shaking his head. "This looks like beggar's food. Do you really serve this to people?" The restaurant fell silent. A few heads turned, and Clara, now he could see the name on her badge, kept her posture firm, but her fingers around her notepad turned white. "If you don't like it, I can bring you something else." He pushed the plate aside. "I don't need to taste it to know it's not worth my time." Clara took a deep breath, put the pen back in her apron pocket and, without a word, pulled out a folded piece of paper. Carefully, she smoothed it out on the table in front of him. "Before you continue with your insults," he said in a firm voice, "take a look at this." Leonardo arched an eyebrow and took the paper with disdain, but as soon as his eyes landed on the image, his heart leapt painfully in his chest. The photo showed a woman holding a plate identical to the one he had despised. Her smile was open, welcoming. Her face was unforgettable. Helena. The world around him seemed to narrow, and for a moment he forgot where he was. Clara tilted her head. "Did you know her?" The question was loaded with irony, as if she already knew the answer. Leonardo felt his throat go dry, his fingers squeezing the edge of the paper. "Where did you get this?" His voice came out harsher than he had intended. Clara crossed her arms. "She was my mother." The impact of those words hit Leonardo like a punch in the gut. The restaurant, the rain outside, the clatter of cutlery on the surrounding tables, everything disappeared. All that remained was the photo and the impassive face of the waitress in front of him. The silence stretched between the two of them, charged with something he couldn't define. And then Clara broke the tension. "But you already knew that, didn't you?" Leonardo felt the weight of the past crash over him like a furious wave. He looked at Clara, then at the photo. The air seemed thin. he began, but the words failed him. Clara crossed her arms. Well, did you know my mother or not? Leonardo looked away, his eyes fixed on the table as if searching for a way out. He forced himself to swallow the lump in his throat before answering. Yes. The confirmation didn't surprise Clara. She let out a dry laugh and shook her head. Of course she did. Men like you never look back, but that doesn't mean they don't leave destruction in their wake. He took a deep breath, trying to regain control. I didn't know she had a daughter. Clara's eyes narrowed. That's funny because, as it turned out, she knew very well who you were. She took the photo back and put it in her apron, as if protecting it was more important than continuing the conversation. How old are you? Leonardo asked suddenly. 24, she answered without hesitation. But why does that matter? Leonardo's mind spun. The math was simple. 24 years, the exact time since he and Helena had last been together. His stomach churned. Clara noticed his expression and narrowed her eyes. What's wrong? You look pale. He needed to get out of there. Now. He pushed back his chair, grabbed his coat, and left some notes on the table. I have to go. Clara didn't try to stop him. She just stood there watching as he left the restaurant without looking back. The rain had thickened. Leonardo walked aimlessly for a few meters before stopping, his fists clenched. Helena's face haunted his mind. Her smile. The smell of summer at that time. And then the inevitable thought came to him. Was Clara his daughter? Leonardo threw himself into the back seat of the car, his thoughts spinning like a hurricane. The impact of his conversation with Clara was still reverberating inside him, creating a knot in his stomach. Home, sir? Asked the driver, adjusting the rearview mirror to watch him. Leonardo opened his mouth to reply, but hesitated. His luxurious penthouse now seemed suffocating. Just drive, he ordered, glancing at the window, where raindrops were trickling down the glass. Helena's name echoed in his mind, and with it, the inevitable question. Was Clara his daughter? If so, it meant that he had lost 24 years, 2.5 decades of moments he could never recover. First steps, first words, first fears, first broken heart. The thought was a punch in the chest. He reached for his cell phone in his jacket pocket and, without thinking twice, dialed a familiar number. I need some information, he said, as soon as the call was answered. About what? The voice on the other end sounded cautious. Helena. And a girl called Clara. I thought your past wasn't your problem, Leonardo. He gritted his teeth. Just do what I'm asking, Daniel. Find out everything. The investigator sighed on the other end of the line. Will you at least tell me why now? Leonardo drummed his fingers against the glass, impatient. Just find out, and let me know as soon as you have something. The call ended, leaving Leonardo with only the unsettling hum of his own thoughts. The hours passed in a blur. When his phone finally vibrated, he picked it up on the first ring. Go ahead. Daniel sniffled before speaking. The girl is Helena's daughter, without a doubt. Her name is on the birth records. The point is, there's something you need to know. Leonardo's chest tightened. Just say it. Helena tried to contact you. Several times. Leonardo felt his whole body tense up. What? Letters. Phone calls. She even showed up at a family event once, but your father made sure nothing got to you. The silence weighed like an anchor. Are you sure about that? His voice sounded low and threatening. Absolutely. Helena spent years trying to find you, but your father made sure you never knew. Leonardo closed his eyes, feeling bitter anger rise in his throat. Do you have proof? I'm gathering everything, but Leonardo, I think you need to prepare yourself. He ended the call without answering. The phone was still in his hand when he looked at his own reflection in the window glass. 24 years lost. All the fault of the man who raised him. A crushing weight settled inside him. But there was one certainty. It wouldn't stay that way. Leonardo parked his car discreetly 2 blocks from the restaurant. He looked through the rearview mirror at the simple facade, the yellowish lights illuminating the wet sidewalk. He didn't know what he was expecting to find, but something inside him urged him to go back. He pushed the door open cautiously. The bell tinkled, and the aroma of homemade food mixed with the strong smell of coffee. Clara was behind the counter, balancing plates while taking customer orders. Her face showed signs of exhaustion, but her posture was firm. She raised her eyes, and her gaze met his. "You again," she said without enthusiasm. "That's right," replied Leonardo, sitting down at the same table as last time. She approached him, pulling her notebook from her apron. "Are you going to order something, or did you just come to disturb my evening?" Leonardo smiled. "The usual." Clara arched an eyebrow. "You didn't even eat last time." "Maybe I've changed my mind." She narrowed her eyes suspiciously, but took the order and walked away. Leonardo observed every detail, the way she interacted with the customers, how she kept everything under control, even in the midst of the rush. She looked like Helena, strong, determined. 20 minutes later, Clara placed the plate in front of him. "Here it is, and this time it would be good if you at least tried to eat." Leonardo picked up his fork and tried a piece. The taste brought back memories that he thought had been buried forever. "Good?" Clara asked, crossing her arms. He nodded. "Yes." She rolled her eyes. What a miracle. The restaurant bell rang, and Clara turned away to see another customer. Leonardo took the opportunity to look around. The place had a cozy atmosphere, but there were signs of wear and tear, the peeling wallpaper, the old cash register. It was then that he noticed something. On the counter, Clara was holding an envelope and frowned as she read it. Her face paled. She folded it tightly and took a deep breath before putting it in her apron pocket. Leonardo knew at that moment that something was wrong. When Clara passed his desk again, he decided to ask, "Problems?" She stopped, pressing her lips together. "Nothing a rich, inconvenient customer like you can solve." Leonardo held her gaze for a moment before letting out a sigh. "Right." She hesitated, as if expecting another provocation, but he just went back to eating. For the first time, Clara seemed speechless, and Leonardo knew that however small, this was a breakthrough. It didn't take Leonardo long to find out what was in the envelope Clara had received that night. A few discreet phone calls confirmed what he already suspected. The restaurant was on the verge of bankruptcy. The bills were overdue, and the threat of eviction was imminent. The next morning he made his decision. He called his lawyer. "I want you to pay off all the debts of the Silver Restaurant, anonymously." "Are you sure about that, sir?" "Just do it." He hung up and looked out of his office window. The city stretched out below him, but his mind was far away. He didn't know if Clara would accept his help. Probably not, but at least he wouldn't lose the only remaining piece of Helena. 2 days later, he returned to the restaurant. He sat in the same place, waiting. Clara emerged from the back, her hair in a hasty bun, holding a folded newspaper. She approached his table and threw the paper in front of him. "Do you want to explain this to me?" Leonardo took the paper and read the headline. "Restaurant Silver receives anonymous donation and avoids closure." He calmly folded the paper. "That sounds like good news." Clara crossed her arms. "I didn't ask for it." Leonardo leaned his elbows on the table and held her gaze. "I know you didn't." "Then why did you do it?" He hesitated. "Because I could." Clara laughed, but without humor. "You think money solves everything, don't you? Money keeps this place open, and that's what I did." She shook her head. "You think you can buy everything, but that doesn't erase what happened." Leonardo took a deep breath. "I'm not trying to erase anything, Clara." She looked at him for a moment, as if analyzing his words. Then, with a sigh, she murmured, "Who are you, anyway?" He felt the weight of the question. It was time. "I'm your father." Clara blinked, as if she hadn't heard correctly. "What?" I'm your father, Leonardo repeated, his voice firm but charged with emotion. She remained motionless. Then she laughed nervously. You've got to be kidding. I'm not. Clara took a step back, denying it with her head. No, you can't just turn up and say that. Leonardo stood up slowly. I didn't know. I never knew. Her eyes shone with anger and pain. You had 24 years to find out. I was prevented. Clara clenched her fists. That doesn't change anything. You weren't there. You were never there. Silence settled between the two of them. Then, without another word, Clara turned her back and walked out of the back door. Leonardo stood there, alone, and for the first time he felt that it might be too late to make amends for the past. Clara walked aimlessly through the streets, the cold wind cutting across her face. Leonardo's words hammered at her mind. I'm your father. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to keep out the pain that rose in her throat. Her father, a complete stranger, a man who had never been there but who now, out of the blue, decided to show up. She didn't want to believe it, but deep down, something inside her knew it was true. Without realizing it, her footsteps led her to the cemetery. She stopped in front of Helena's gravestone, the marble damp from the night's serenity. You never told me, she whispered. Why didn't you? Silence was the only answer. Clara ran her fingers over her mother's name, engraved on the cold stone. If Helena had told her the truth, would her life have been different? She stood there for a while, until she finally sighed. She needed answers. The next morning, she returned to the restaurant. When she entered, she found Leonardo sitting at his usual table, an untouched cup of coffee in front of him. He looked up when he saw her. Clara pulled out a chair and sat down opposite him. I need to understand something. Leonardo remained calm. Ask him. She interlaced her fingers. If you didn't know about me, why now? What made you show up? He took a deep breath. The food. Clara frowned. The what? The stew. When I tasted it, I knew right away. It was the same as your mother used to make. Clara remained silent. Leonardo continued. When I found out who you were, I made sure I knew the truth. My father kept everything from me, and He paused, staring into his coffee cup. I failed you both. Clara took a deep breath. You can't change the past. He nodded slowly. I know, but I can try to be part of your future. She looked away, her heart squeezing. I don't know how to deal with this. Neither do I, he admitted. The two of them remained silent. Then Clara let out a tired sigh. There's something you need to know about me. What's that? She stared at him. I don't trust easily. Leonardo nodded. And I don't give up easily. She smiled slightly despite everything. That was enough for now.